Let's start tonight with recession fears on the rise in this country as the cost of living hits record levels and the Bank of Canada hikes interest rates to rein inflation in. The finance minister insists there still is a way to avoid that R word.
There is no country better positioned in the world, certainly no country in the G7 better positioned than Canada to achieve that soft landing.
So is the finance minister right? Is there a good chance of a soft landing in Canada? Let's check in with two of this country's top economists. Jimmy Jean is Desjardins' chief economist and strategist. He's with us tonight from Montreal. And Don Drummond is TD Bank's former senior vice president and chief economist. He's in Ottawa this evening. Hello to both of you. Thank you very much for making the time. Mr. Jean, I'll start with you. When the finance minister talks about the potential for a soft landing here in Canada versus other countries, how do you interpret that?
Well, I think this is what's really top of mind, and really the whole recession obsession really is due to the fact that it's really difficult. Historically speaking, it's been very difficult to identify a recession until it's well underway, and right now, this assessment is being further complicated by the fact that we have many buffers, like the high savings, like the fact that we have so many job vacancies. So, at a minimum, I think. We ought to see a recession in housing. In fact, we think it's already started. We think it's going to start. It's going to last for 6 quarters, and then the question becomes whether this will create contagion to non-housing types of spending and investment. And what really holds the answer on that front is how the job market perform. Will we see this kind of gentle impact on the labor market, or will this morph into mass layoffs, income losses, and defaults? So really, the job market will be what holds the answer as to whether this is a soft-ish landing or whether we have a traditional classic recession.
Mr. Drummond, what do you think the likelihood at this stage of the game, obviously, is for a recession? And what do you make of, if you look at the markets over the past few days, certainly fears of a recession are reflected there. What are your thoughts on the possibility of one?
Well, if I've learned one thing from being involved in economic forecasts for 4 decades, is be very modest about them, because you really don't know, and anybody who claims to know, ask them 2 and 3 times and then check 2 years later when you find out they're quite wrong. We got a really tricky situation here because the Bank of Canada only has one instrument at its disposal, and that's raising interest rates. And it's a very dull instrument. It has long legs. It takes a long time from a change in interest rates to soften output in labor markets. And it takes longer after that for that to influence wage and price changes. So you raise interest rates and you always wonder, is it enough? Is it enough? And the problem is you don't know for quite a while. So you don't see inflation coming down, so you raise them again. And of course, that's the history we've had before. But one thing we got to remember, though, the level of interest rates is still extraordinarily low. And in fact, the Bank of Canada at this very moment is still adding stimulus. They're actually encouraging inflation because they haven't even raised their interest rates to the neutral rate. As for the Minister of Finance saying we're in the better condition to weather this, that's sort of like winning a race where everybody else is going backwards. We're not in that great position because we're so heavily indebted. Households, particularly with the mortgage, the line of credits, the government sector, the private sector, we got debt beyond the eyeball. So we're very vulnerable to an interest rate increase, which again comes back to where I started. It's very difficult to maneuver this through interest rates, but they've got to move. They've got to get them up, but nobody can say with any certainty we're going to avoid a recession.
Let me just quickly follow up with you. When you say they got to move, they got to get them up, do you mean beyond what's expected, for example, on July 13th, which I think seems to be around 3/4 of a point?
Well, at the absolute minimum, they have to get it into the range of their so-called neutral interest rate, which they say is 2 to 3%. And keep in mind, that would be where you'd want to be interest rates to be if inflation was and had always been and was expected to be at 2%. None of those conditions apply. Clearly, they have to raise it above their neutral. So, no, they're not going to be done. Even if they do 50 or another 75 basis points, they're not going to be done. But again, let's take a longer time horizon. Let's suppose the Bank of Canada's policy rate goes into the 3 to 4% range. By any other measure other than the last 2 decades, that is an extraordinarily low interest rate. You can go back centuries. We haven't seen interest rates that low. They're still very low.
Mr. Jean, you mentioned a couple things, but I wanted to zone in for people watching Canadians who do have that fear that not only right now are they dealing with high interest rates and a high cost of living, but they might be dealing with a recession 18 months down the road as well. What are the key things that you watch, that you keep your eye on, and that they should be watching over the next 18 months to help us understand if that actually might be the case, or if that soft landing is on tap?
Absolutely. I think we had a very important report yesterday from the Bank of Canada, the Business Outlook Survey, how sentiment is faring. And, through all the gloom and doom, what you read from that survey is that consumers feel that the economic situation is still very strong and that their jobs are very secure. That's very important. There's one thing if people expect a recession but expect the neighbor to be affected, but when it comes to their own situation, if they fear for their jobs, for their livelihood, then it sets off a whole different set of reactions and behaviors and spending cutbacks in particular. So I'm going to be watching that very attentively. I do think that the labor market does have some very good momentum right now. I think in the next few months, in the summer months, as people rekindle with activities that they've been missing for so long, I think we're still in good shape. I mean, bookings have been made. That spending is pretty much locked in. But it's really what's after. When we come into the fall, those interest rates bite even further. The housing market lines up a series of declines, and the psychology, the negative mood sets in. And maybe that's the time when we start to see employers laying off some people, or at the very minimum hiring much less. I think that's where the danger zone would sort of open up here.
As you look to the future, Mr. Drummond, final question to you. You know this is a political show. What should we be watching where the government is concerned? You heard Minister Freeland today say, this is up to the central bank. Nothing's off the table, but this is, reining in inflation is primarily the role of the central bank. What would you be anticipating or watching for from the Feds over the next number of months?
Well, first of all, the Minister of Finance has said they're doing their bit because they introduced a restrictive budget. That's not true. It actually had more spending increases than it had tax increases. And so I'm not sure that they could say that the fiscal policies are supporting it. And we know the key is to not have a collapse of the housing market. We know that we have to have more affordable housing, but nothing really is shaking loose at federal, provincial, or municipal level to increase the supply of housing. That's what I'd look for. It's all report after report. We'll do something 5-10 years down the road. We're having a target of 450,000 new immigrants coming in. How are we going to house them? Never mind the people we have here now. That's what I'm looking for.
Okay, on that note, I'll leave it there. Thank you both of us for sharing your insights with us this evening. Appreciate it, Don Drummond and Jimmy.
Okay. Bye.
Pleasure. As always, thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.